her own firm. Kim Bohr's track record reads like a roadmap of modern leadership, and today she's the force behind Spark Effect and the host of the Courage to Advance podcast, helping leaders move from firefighting to focused execution. This is going to be a fun conversation. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mike. I'm excited to be here.
So let's start at the beginning. Before you were the strategist and change agent that we know today, you built a career across sales, leadership, and entrepreneurship. So I want to go back to the roots of how you became you. All right.
Yes.
So early in your career, what experiences shaped your appetite for leadership and strategy?
Oh my goodness, that is such a good question. What I will tell you is there was a lot of experiences that were than ideal, and I saw a lot of poor display of leadership in various forms. And I felt very strongly that business needed to be better than it is today, and that at the heart of that is investment in people and investment in values and really understanding how all those things come together. And so I made a commitment to myself to always follow with intention, and that I wanted to be a leader. And so maybe, even when I was younger, I had a sense of leading organizations and people and things like that. So I think it was very ingrained in me very early. Yet these real experiences just put a fire in my belly like I can't describe. And that is what set me down a path of learning the way that I have.
So you had roles at UPS, MCI, and Career Builder. What line connects those early years to your work now?
So I was very interested in how organizations operated. And so being a part of those large organizations, of which a couple don't even exist anymore, and some of the listeners may not even know what we're talking about, but
Right.
nonetheless, those were fabulous, very incredibly experienced organizations. And what I appreciate about them was that they had structure that allowed me as a young, you know, professional coming into the workforce to gain training and experience and things that brought me up to speed very quickly. What I uh, over time wanted to evolve out of was that I couldn't make as big of an impact in those organizations in the way I wanted to. And so I got to see wonderful experiences, which I think of myself as a student of business. So I got to see things like, what is it like to go through a merger? What is it like when a company acquires another organization? And it just doesn't seem like that it should be possible for those things to happen. And so I was very studious in those types of lessons, and then started to uh, kind of downsize myself, I like to say, in a really healthy way, where I wanted to be able to take that type of learning and apply it into smaller organizations where I could make a bigger impact.
So what was the first real leadership challenge that you faced?
Oh my goodness. I think one of the first real leadership challenges I faced was working inside an organization where I had a leader that I think was less than perhaps honest in how he approached things. And so that was something that had me really just having to, for my own reputation, had to really separate in those dynamics to figure out how can I fulfill what I had to do in the organization for the business and yet not get caught up in some of the things that he was trying to do. And then from there, it went into really leading an organization that I was new. It was new into the area that it was, establishing itself in, and taking over a team that had existed, but it hadn't been around for very long. And one of the things that was very challenging was that it was one of my first official leadership roles, beyond supervising or those type of influencing. And I affectionately say that my team rebelled against me, and it caused me to have to pause. And I can remember the conversation to this day of calling an executive coaching firm and saying, I have asked for feedback. I'm not getting it from my organization or my leader. And I know something's off, and I want to be a leader, and I want to be a strong leader, and I need help. And that was what set me down the journey of investing deeply in myself in that regard, that then put me on a path of being a leader that people wanted to follow versus trying to lead in all the ways that just aren't effective.
Yeah, I know it reminds me of something that happened to me. I had a client that hired me as their CTO, as a full-time CTO, and we delivered food for restaurants. So you think like Grubhub or,
Hmm.
Uber Eats. And it was coming. We had a problem with our fax server. It would randomly send like Chinese food to the steak restaurant and
Oh
steak
no.
to the Chinese food. Whoever developed the software didn't think about the fact that what happens when a number's busy, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And the whole queue got messed up. So myself and my lead developer, we spent an entire week each, so 80 hours, fixing it, and it went out and it was flawless. And so when we would go to our office, we would pass one of the three owners, and he called us in the office and started asking us about, the fax thing and what did you guys do, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and had this long, like, kind of critical conversation. And my staff member says, Matt, it would be nice if, we spent so many hours on this and we put this out and it worked perfectly. It'd be nice if you mentioned that. And he points to the light switch on the wall and he says, you see that light switch over there? Well, when I come in every day and turn the lights on, I don't call the electrician to thank him for it.
Oh my.
So I took my employee aside and I said, it was a real big moment for me because I realized, I have to back him up, but at the same time, I gotta let him know maybe you shouldn't have said that to the boss.
Yeah.
And so I took him aside and it was pretty much then that I learned that a big part of being a leader is showing your people how to act in a situation like that. And
Absolutely.
it took me probably another year before then I ended up coming up with my coaching program that I have now to save my own life. I worked way too many hours back then. But it was just interesting. Like his attitude was just sort of like, well, it worked. That's your job. It's supposed to work.
Yeah.
So,
And that's terrible.
and he didn't understand. I mean, I remember a couple years later having a conversation with him at like a management retreat and explaining that scenario and saying he was just looking for feedback
Right.
and you weren't giving it to him. So how does he know if you're happy with what he did if you say nothing? And he kind of was like,
Exactly.
"Oh, I never thought of it that way." So I feel you when you say you weren't getting feedback from your team or your leader.
Yeah.
That's not good. So what's a key moment in your career that made you realize you needed to start your own business?
So I had been in an organization where we were really growing and scaling it, and it was still there was three of us that were leading it predominantly, and it was still a founder owned organization. And one of the things that became clear is that to we had done a tremendous amount of work and growth, but to get to the next level, it really needed a different level of investment and way of thinking, and we had already done some of those pivotal pieces with hiring because of course, as we grow organizations, the different levels of talent and things, but we needed the next big jump. Otherwise, we were going to become very irrelevant very quickly. And the owner just couldn't get on the same page. And I realized at that moment that this was not where my talents had tapped out there. There wasn't anything else that I really could be able to do at that stage. And so when I left, I started my consulting company, the Innovari Group. And what I was really trying to achieve there was kind of finding my own voice in where I thought leadership needed to go. I did a good number of business advisory work. I had created some courses and self-published a book that really helped people try to find their kind of unique nature and some of their career pathing and ways that perhaps they just hadn't been thinking about it at the time. And so it was really that moment of feeling like I didn't have the same level of growth and impact that I could make that prompted me to make that next pivot at that point.
So when did you first see the cracks in how organizations handle leadership development?
Oh my goodness. I think, early on before, when I was in, telecom, you would just see there was a certain level of investment in, of course, the way to sell and the products and the services and all that stuff. But in the actual how do you lead effectively, there was less of that. And was seeing that you could have somebody go through a leadership course, but then not actually practice and actually live what they were supposed to be doing. And it became like flavor of the month kind of sentiment, right? And so that's what I realized, that there had to be, a different approach to work in this regard. And so finding more alignment with Spark Effect, the executive coaching work, the other things that we do, that's where I started to realize that there's more to just the training alone, which of course we do, but we're looking for more of the behavioral based lasting impact that really needs to help pull people through.
Yeah, definitely. I think that what I find from coaching tech executives is that most of them are kind of pushed up the ladder and not really taught how to be a leader. And
Exactly.
they don't even understand that there's a difference between being a manager and a leader.
Right.
I don't even like the term manager. I wish people would stop using the term manager. I almost would rather have, instead of saying manager of customer service, I wish they'd have it say leader of customer service, because the mindset that it
Mhm.
brings is so much different. And people don't even understand the difference, like I said. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it's a major flaw in corporations, and it's just interesting that places like Japan, they perfect this kind of stuff, and Americans look at it like it's some sort of weird, strange way to do business, but it's extremely effective. So
It is. Well, and I think what's so important about what you said too around how tech leaders evolve is that it's such a, and this happens in other functional areas as well, right? But certainly when they're highly technically capable, there's so much promotion happening based on that. And there becomes a gap between some of those other leadership skills. And we see that in many high performers, that perhaps because they're exceptional at what they do, they may not be ready or ever ready in some cases to be leading others. And so being able to give people that kind of support and help them immediately is so critical. And I think so many organizations we see just fail to do that right away.
yeah, your comment reminded me of when I used to be a retail manager, and there's always that hierarchy of, this guy's next to get a store and that guy's next to get a store. And sometimes I'd say to myself, but why that guy?
Yeah,
Like, he's not ready. He clearly isn't ready. And it shouldn't be about how long you've been here. It needs to be the whole package. So could you tell me maybe about a time that you tried something, it failed, but ultimately it was a critical learning moment?
oh my goodness. What could I pick from? There's so many, right? I tell people so often that the most challenging experiences you have are the best learning, and that's so true. So I would say back to when I was that first experience of leading somebody, of leading that organization, I could remember that we were having to hire and ramp up, and we were, we had the client base, we had the right territory, and I was operating from this lens of go get these numbers, do these metrics. It was very rigid. And I wasn't taking into account what was going on in people's personal lives or what was happening or what were some of the other factors were. It was just like, hey, you do these numbers, we're going to get these results. And it was very, very much of that vein. And when the team rebelled on me, what I did is we did do a 360. I engaged the executive coach. We did a 360. We learned what are the things that I'm doing that were having people feel very disconnected and not wanting to rally around. And thankfully, through that process of executive coaching and having to be in that very vulnerable place, I was able to regain their trust, and I was able to, gain their followership. And we did another 360 at the end of the coaching work, and the everything was reflective and shown the scores had aligned with where they needed to be, but also just my relationships became really strong and really important. But that was a really humbling experience to have to realize that I sucked at what I was trying to do. And it wasn't, we don't try to go in and be jerks and at least most of us. And so I was, yeah, I mean, there was some, a lot of just embarrassment and things to realize that I had approached that way, but yet I was excited to then gain those skills I had and start to build on them. And by no means had I not made mistakes since then, but that's how we are as leaders and humans, right? And then it becomes how quickly can we clean up the messes we make and try to and try to learn from those and grow and move on.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because you're right. It could be really demoralizing to go through that kind of experience. And it's great that you came out on the other side, with, something positive to talk about. Too many people don't. It's sometimes it's the career killer for people when they hit
Can
that
be.
wall and they're like, why doesn't my team like me? What am I doing
Yeah.
wrong? So, what personal values or principles have been non-negotiable for you throughout your career?
Oh, well, definitely the idea that business has to be better than it is today. And that like we have a obligation to society if we're in business to function at the highest level of our values and our professionalism. And I agree that's not always the case in organizations, but to me, that's been something that's a non-negotiable. So when I've been in situations or, organizations where that seemed to not be aligned, that was no longer the right place for me to be at. And, and really also knowing, looking at integrity and trust and really feeling very much around um, really having honest and direct conversations. I'm a very big proponent of, we can be both diplomatic and direct in ways that are honoring somebody and giving them that feedback. And I think that a lot of people feel like they don't want to be mean or they don't, or that it's hurtful to give somebody feedback. And yet we see so many opportunities missed to grow individuals because we didn't. And everybody does want to be trying to do their best. So I think, not being affiliated with, you know, organizations or situations that don't value that. So for me, that's always been a very, very important factor.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of learning as an entrepreneur that not everybody is my customer, and even if they sort of fit, it's okay to basically fire that customer and move on. It's a
Yes.
hard thing to learn because when you first start out as an entrepreneur, um, every penny counts. And
Yeah.
so then you're looking at that client and you're like, well, I really shouldn't be working with this client. But if I let them go, what am I going to do? But I'll tell you, once I got through that mindset issue, letting clients go who were just, energy sucks, ended up bringing in better clients to take their place. And you don't believe it at the time when you're doing it, but after a couple of times, it's not a miracle. It just happens for some
Hmm.
reason. It's the way the world works. And I think what it is perhaps you're so focused on trying to make that customer happy who's never going to be happy that you
Right.
can't even find new customers. So,
It's
it's
so true. I mean, not everybody's your customer. Not everybody's the right fit at this stage of what you're doing or offering or the stage that they're in.
right.
And, we've even been talking about that in our organization with just how some organizations are just shifting, especially around executive coaching, for example. There's a lot of shift in the type of coaching and what that means and platforms and things. And so that does have it's healthy to then reevaluate what is the right kind of company that we should be working for, that where the values are aligned. I think that's really important.
So we covered your backstory. Let's talk about the work you're doing now.
Yeah.
You took everything you learned and you built Spark Effect and the Innovair Group into forces for organizational change. So let's see how that actually works. From my understanding, Spark Effect came from the merger of two firms.
Mhm.
How did you approach integrating the cultures and the systems?
Wow. So it was one of the things that we did really deep due diligence on was understanding how each firm operated because we essentially did the same thing. We did some things a little bit different. We were in different territories. And so coming together as two organizations, we thought it would be extremely complementary talent, complementary, just some unique things that would overlay nicely. We took for granted that how we got work done was not similar. And that was a real eye opener. And so, what we also did was, and everybody was extremely well intended. So, through this process that was challenging at times, we tried very hard to keep open communication to, at the same time, we're kind of feeling each other out. So, once the merger's completed and everybody knows we're now together, we went through a process of trying to integrate the two companies. And instead, because it was a merger, it wasn't a you're going to do it our way. It was a, is it A, B, or is this a new thing called C? And boy, is that challenging. At the same time, we went through a rebranding. I've got to say that integrating and rebranding for the size of organization we were, I don't know how we could have parse those apart very well. And at the same time, I think it was absolutely insane to have done them together because it was a tremendous amount of effort um and oh, some painful moments around trying to get it right. And so that was where we landed is really exciting. When we think about Spark Effect, we landed in a place that has, the best of both organizations and a name that we are really proud of that feels like it's moving the momentum forward in the work we do. And yes, integrating two organizations like that, you would think being small could be easy, and it really is not.
Yeah, I can imagine the complexity of that. As a tech guy, I've had to do that many, many times where the one restaurant delivery service I worked for, they were constantly buying other companies up that were smaller than them and just trying to integrate them into our software. And then they'd say, well, our old software could do this.
Hmm.
All right, we'll get to that.
Yeah.
That's right now you're gonna have to deal with this. But yeah, it's quite the experience. It's quite the experience.
Yeah. Well, and I think to that point, people feel very personal to the way they did things, right? And so even though it was just a process, it was a process that they felt was effective. And so it became personal when there was that, yeah, when we had to look at it from all all sides.
Well, it's like I mentioned to you, hiring a new production company and trying to figure out their process, my process, when things are going to get done. There's no trust right away because you're worrying that, oh, I need these notes looked at by
Hmm.
a certain day. Are they going to get there in time? Now, I'm sure after months of working with them, that'll go away, but right now it makes me a little anxious.
Yes.
So when when you're diagnosing leadership disconnects inside of an organization, what does that process look like?
So we're very much asking questions and trying to understand what's, under the hood. And oftentimes, as I'm sure you experience too, people come to you with what they think the problem is. And it's really up to us to ask enough questions to understand if they're really solving for what's at the root cause or if it's just something maybe more painful at the moment, but it will still be there. And back to the idea of where sometimes training isn't always the solution for things because we're not actually addressing what's really causing the behaviors or the lack of adoption. And so we really get in and try to understand what it is and then help them prioritize with what they should be focused on in the moment, whether that's with regard to outplacement services because there's layoffs that have to happen, or whether that is investment in team alignment because unless the team gets on the same page, we're going to continue to have challenges, especially with executive teams, or even executive coaching and trying to get leaders to be to be on the at maybe some of the most baseline levels of behaviors and skills that they need to have to grow into the where the organization needs them to be.
So you've said something about leadership development fails without coaching. I agree with you, actually. Could you explain why and how you fix the gap?
Yeah, I think what having the ability to have somebody that application, right? It's all around that application. So when we think about learning something, even when we're learning it in a dynamic environment, we're doing maybe real case studies, everything is different when we walk out and we're back into our normal routine. And what is nice when you think about executive coaching laying into this is that it allows for those tools that you may have learned to then be put into real life work, and then to be reminded of, hey, remember, this is that kind of situation where that thing is a perfect application. And so having that and having somebody to hold a mirror up, one of the things that we're very big proponents of is that we are very human centered in the work we do around coaching. And although we use technology, we believe that, an AI bot to coach you isn't going to be the most effective because it can't call BS on you when you're just trying to be validated left and right. And that's what an executive coach can do, and help take a learning from a training or other forms like that into real application.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Could you share maybe a recent success story from Spark Effect that captures your approach in action?
Yeah, so we are right now, when we think about some of the work we're doing in this trust research, we are really working with organizations to help understand what level of disruption is taking place, and what risks they have around it, and what risks they have to their leadership. And so recently I was working with a team of executives who continue to get feedback from their employees that they were just not communicating well. And as much as they have many different initiatives going at once, and when one initiative is done, the other one, there's 10 others that are already in process, and it never felt like they were getting to a place of celebration or pause or anything. It was just like it was this constant. And one of the things that we talked about was we did an assessment that really looked at how is that team's dynamics working? What are the behaviors? And we really started to ask a lot of questions of them around what are some of the tactical things they're doing as a team? What are they doing when they're leaving meetings? And then how does that look when they're trying to actually communicate on the same page? And what they were finding is that they would leave the same meeting and communicate as if they were all in different meetings. And so the work we did in taking them through finding that alignment was really helping them and starting to move forward, and it did positively change the perception they were having inside much of their organization.
So you have a podcast, Courage to Advance.
Mhm.
How does that podcast feed into Spark Effect's mission?
So we have a deep belief that it's, as many of us know, it's lonely at the top, and we feel that we are in a not just a current moment, but just that there's a lot of opportunity for courage to be displayed inside leaders, inside all levels of organizations. And when we created this podcast, we wanted a platform where leaders and experts could talk about difficult situations. They could talk about what does it look like to have to make tough calls? How do we navigate that with trust? And so we wanted people to be able to share their stories so that others could feel like they weren't alone. There's ways of looking at something differently, and starting to create a really positive community. And so we're going into season 2 right now. We're very excited about the discussions that we're having and what we're going to bring to audiences.
Yeah, congratulations on that because most people don't make it past a few episodes. So
Yeah,
that's really great. I mean, I get
thanks.
it. I get it all the time because we have so many episodes. They say, how do you last? Just commitment, you know?
Commitment. Well, and interest in like what we're doing, right? And the
Yeah.
fact that we know we get to touch somebody, that maybe it's that one person that heard it that day that was like, I am so glad I listened to this. I needed that. That was something I didn't think about. And that's what we want to be doing to make an impact.
It's the perfect segue to this question. So if there's a leader listening right now who could change one habit tomorrow, just one, to drive better execution, what would it be?
So really, very much being focused in what you say and what you do with your team inside your organization. We released a study really recently around trust and the impact of disruption. And one of the things that we found was that disruption's constant. We all know that disruption's constant. But what we looked at measuring was personal and professional disruption. And what we found was that 71% of the people that had responded had at least one of these disruptive elements in the last 24 months. And what we also found with this research was that although local leader trust is very strong, it drops the greatest by over 51 points when the disruption happens. And so, what I would tell leaders listening is that don't take for granted the what's going on with your team. Don't hesitate to figure out how they're doing personally. Don't, and assume good intent, because often we are um we're just assuming, we're telling stock, having these conversations in our head that aren't actually true. And so we need to engage with others to figure out, asking questions and being curious and trying to understand.
Yeah, I think assume good intentions is a great phrase that people in any kind of relationship need to pay attention to. And you mentioned like the conversations that go in your head. And I'm constantly talking to my wife about that, about how people do strange things, and then we go into our mode of, I wonder why they did that. Could
Yeah.
it be because this? Could it be? Well, you don't know because you didn't
Yeah.
ask them, and you're never gonna know because it's not you. And I think by assuming good intentions, you take away a lot of that because then you're not saying, "Well, I wonder if they're mad at me. I wonder if this. I wonder if that."
Exactly.
You just you move on. And assuming good intentions, I mean, it's what honestly, I've been married now 10 years, and we're going as strong as we were in the day one because we always try to assume good intention. So there's never that you did that because you wanted to hurt me or you did that because you were mad at me. It
Right.
You assume the good intentions and it helps you move forward because you know most you said it earlier. People don't go into these things intending to cause problems for other people.
Right.
And so by assuming bad intentions, you're assuming that that's what they're doing. So I really like that and I had to point that out. So we talked about your journey, your impact.
Hmm.
So let's talk about future facing stuff. The world right now is completely obsessed with AI and disruption. You
Hmm.
mentioned your study,
Hmm.
but you are making the case that the human edge still matters. So let's explore that.
Yeah. Yeah, we really are. So, just to go a little bit more into this study, and then obviously we want to make sure your listeners have opportunity to download it. What we found was that in looking at these different types of disruption, AI was absolutely a leading disruptor. And in fact, what we also found was that it had the biggest trust destroyer in the way that it was handled from an implementation standpoint. But it wasn't the worst culprit of all. But the reason we focused on this was because disruption is not going away. And when you think about trust intuitively, people often, it's like, well, yeah, of course, trust would be broken if somebody didn't, or an organization didn't uphold the world. But what we wanted to do is we felt like there was actual business metrics behind that. And so what the study's shown is that there's a real direct financial correlation, and we have a real impact on revenue, reputation, and retention. That's a big deal. And that's enough for leaders to be paying attention, to start to think that trust really should be a business strategy. So as we look forward, we're really putting a lot of emphasis on what does it look like to have trust as a strategic element in your organization, in a way that it matters at a thinking about how people are doing, the way we communicate, the consistency we have, giving people an opportunity to ask questions, about why these changes are happening and not shut them down. And so we're making a bet that with all the technology that is going on, that has a place in our lives and in our work, that the human-centered work is still going to be the most relevant. And in fact, we just completed a go to market survey that we were looking at around executive coaching. And what we found was that the majority of these respondents prefer to have a human involved and not have an AI bot coaching them. And so that's not everybody, but that is still the fact that people want somebody to hold them accountable, and they want to be called out on their BS. And so we believe that trust in the state of organizations right now is really important. And we're going to continue to try to help organizations look at it differently than they have before.
What signals tell you that trust is truly present inside a team beyond like the surface level, friendliness that people have?
Yeah, it's really when something, when teams can talk about the really difficult times they navigated it together and how they came out the other end. So when they talk about like, yeah, this was really challenging, but I knew my leader had my back, or I knew my colleagues were going to be there for us because we've talked about it, because we've talked about what it was like to navigate something challenging together, or we know each other and we know we're good people. And so that's where that ability to have individuals connect on a human basis, outside of work, inside of work, understanding like what's going on is deeply important to trust building and navigating that when things do go south. And what we also know to be true is that things like leadership turnover, reorganization, somebody having their leader suddenly exited, that has the biggest impact on trust inside organizations. And that's something that companies need to really be thinking about, how they handle it and doing it right versus just thinking that it doesn't matter, which a lot do.
So how could trust be treated as like a measurable business asset rather than just a soft skill?
Yeah. So thinking about the fact that, how do organizations performance look? So part of what we measured was the financial performance of organizations to find that organizations with uh, higher trust scores performed better financially than those with lower trust scores. And the same thing along the lines of with retention and what was thought of those organizations. So we developed a trust scoring system. We developed a trust index. And so there's ways that organizations can literally apply the work we did and be able to actually find financial measurement inside of their own businesses to see that it matters.
That's really cool. What do you think the future of leadership development looks like in a tech-driven remote work world?
I think it is, I think that the concerning part is there's so much democratization and access that people get flooded and don't know what's the most useful tool. And I think that's where so many of the systems of like the LMSs and these things that all had, it's like got everything you could ever want at your fingertips get underutilized because there's just so much. And so I think what organizations can do to win and help developing their people is really, what does each individual person need? Having something that's much more prescribed and tailored to those individuals and how what they need for their level of the journey they are on is really critical. And so instead of just saying, hey, it's all there, go find it, it's really about how can we tailor that to what Mike needs versus what Kim needs at this stage.
So what's an outdated leadership habit that you think is going to disappear in the next 5 years?
Oh, that's a great question. So I think an outdated leadership habit would be um, assuming that uh, everybody's just going to put in their time and wait around to be, for the next promotion to come up. And, we know this with the Gen Z that they are not like that. And I think there's a lot of misperception around how committed they are in things. And we've done some research around that as well. What we know is that they're very committed. They're very committed to their local leader level, direct leaders, and they aren't going to wait around. They want to have the aspects of life that they can bring them joy. They want to commit and make an impact. And if they're not being invested in, they're not going to stick around. And so I think we still have a lot of leaders with the belief of, you know, you were hired, just shut up and do your job. And with the idea of you are, when your time comes, you'll be tapped. And I think that's very much not the way to be thinking about it, especially with this newer generation.
Definitely, definitely. I have two myself that are Gen Z, and
Same.
they think very differently than my two older ones. Um,
Yes.
so looking back at your journey, everything you've done at Spark Effect in the future that you see for leadership, what's one mindset shift or practical change that you wish every leader would make today to future-proof themselves and their organization?
It is, I think that it would be to to be flexible and to really be open to and curious to what's possible, because we very much often think that we have a very set way of perhaps thinking how things are supposed to play out, and then when they don't, we think that maybe we're thrown off entirely. And what I would say is just understanding that many doors open for reasons you just don't know. And so having the idea to be flexible, curious, trying to get to know people, that maybe even people who are outside of your way of thinking, is incredibly powerful. And I would encourage people to try to break out of the mold a bit and get to know some people that maybe are just thinking differently than you.
I love that. I love that. So as we wrap up, what's the best way for people to connect with you or Spark Effect if they're ready to rethink their leadership approach?
Absolutely. So they can absolutely connect with me personally on LinkedIn. They can definitely download some of the resources we wanted to offer your listeners at sparkeffect.com/gaining. And if they want to check out our podcast, they can find it on any of their favorite platforms at Courage to Advance, or they can go to our Courage to Advance podcast.com page, or find us on our Courage to Advance YouTube channel. But certainly that podcast will be on any of their favorite platforms that they want to. And by reaching out to me on LinkedIn or through our website, we have a fabulous team of people that are willing to and excited to have conversations and help people grow.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, thanks so much for sharing your story and your insights today. It's been a masterclass on leadership evolution.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's been really fun, and I appreciate the conversation.
So for those of you listening, if you're serious about stepping up your leadership game, transforming your organization, make sure you check out Kim's work at sparkeffect.com. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe to the show, join our community. It's where conversations like this keep going long after the episode ends.